Today I am working away on roasting some pumpkins here. I have several down the basement from our garden, and these are pie pumpkins that we grew, and I wanted to get some of them roasted up before they get too soft. So I thought I would make a pumpkin pie today from these, and I thought I'd bring you along and show you how I make pumpkin pies from scratch. We will do the pastry from scratch, but you can use store-bought or whatever pastry you like. This big cookie sheet with parchment on it, and I'm just going to use that to roast the pumpkins on. I've got these pie pumpkins. I can't remember the variety of these. I can put it in the description below, see what variety those pumpkins are, but they're lovely. Nice and sweet, and a bowl for the seeds, and a spoon to scoop it out, and a knife, and I've got my cutting board there. I also have the oven temperature preheated to 400 degrees. Okay, let's start with this one. Just a look on the inside. And I do try to get most of the stringy stuff out. I don't want my pumpkin pies to be stringy. Let's go like that. So I've got all the pumpkins hollowed out, and I just want to put them skin side up on a baking sheet, and there are my seeds, so I can separate those later. So I'm just going to put these in the oven at 400 for about 45 minutes, and then we'll check them. While the pumpkin is roasting, I'm just going to make up the pastry. I do a big batch so that I have some in the freezer for future pies or tarts, and I use Crisco vegetable shortening. You can use whatever pastry you like, all butter, lard, store-bought is fine, but I like my mom's no-fail pastry. It works really nicely, it's easy to roll. So anyway, it calls for flour, that's all-purpose flour, 1 pound of shortening, 1 cup of ice water, 1 egg, a tablespoon of vinegar, and a teaspoon of salt. I just do the spoon and level method for my flour, just put it in your sifter. And this calls for 5 cups of all-purpose flour. So that's 2. You don't have to sieve it if you don't want. A lot of times I don't bother, but this time I am. So that's 3. 4. And that's 5. Next, I'm going to add in a teaspoon of salt. And then I'm going to cut in this shortening. Manageable, I just cut it up into cubes. Okay, I'm just going to add that right into the flour. And I'm just going to use a pastry blender to blend this cold shortening into the flour. You can use 2 knives if you want, or you can actually just use your food processor to blend up the shortening into your flour. And when I'm doing this, I like to use quite a large bowl for this, because that way I can work the shortening into the flour, and I'm not flinging it off outside the bowl onto the counter. There, that's good. You want to have some chunks in there, and it's supposed to look like that. Now we're going to add an egg. And there is 1 cup of ice water. And 1 tablespoon of vinegar, just the white vinegar. Beat that together. And I'm just going to make a well in the center and pour it all in at once. And just stir it until it comes together into like a shaggy ball. Okay. Okay, now I'm just going to take that log of dough. I'm going to cut this up into 5 pieces. Maybe I'll see if I can get 6. There. Okay, we're just going to wrap these up in plastic and put some in the refrigerator that we're going to use for the pies, and the rest will go into the freezer for future use. So we have 6 discs of dough, and you can do 3 double crust pies or 6 single crust pies. You can blind bake them for cream pies, or we're going to use 2 of these today for the pumpkin pies. These 2 will go in the refrigerator, and this dough will be good for up to a couple of days in the fridge before it starts to oxidize. And these discs here will be good for about 3 months in the freezer. There, the pumpkins are done roasting. I ended up cooking them 10 minutes longer, so it was about 55 minutes. So I'm just going to let them cool down for a bit before I scoop the pulp out. Okay, they've cooled down somewhat. They're still kind of hot, but I'm just going to I think what I can do is just peel off this skin. It's probably easier if I leave them facing down. And it would probably be easier if I let them cool completely too. I have a bowl here. I'm just going to put the pumpkin into this bowl before we puree it. I've got my bowl of the pumpkin pulp, and these are going to go to the compost. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to puree these in the food processor. If you don't have one of those, you can use an immersion blender, your blender, a potato masher. Okay, so I'm just going to spoon some of this into the food processor here. I've got a colander and a bowl here to catch the drips. And you can put some cheesecloth in the bottom of that, but I don't have any right now, so I'm just going to put this right in the colander because it's quite wet and I want to get some of that water out. So I don't want my pumpkin pie to be watery. Okay, so this pumpkin is almost getting there. You can see the liquid that's dripped out of that colander. This one's pretty good too, but I'm going to let it drip a little bit longer. And this one I just put in. All right, so I'm going to roll out the dough into these pie plates while that puree is draining a little bit more liquid. And I'm going to actually make 2 pies because I'm going to share one with my neighbor. So I just left the other ball of dough in the fridge until I'm ready to use it. And this is, I believe it's a 9-inch pie plate. I'll double check. And then I'm just going to clean it up a little bit. So that's done. Some people blind bake their pumpkin pie shell before they put the filling in, but I find it just this gets too overcooked. So what I do, I'll show you a trick, what I do when I'm ready to fill them. So there's that one. There, that one's done too. So I'm just going to stick these in the fridge for a minute until I am done my filling, and then we'll put them in the oven. I have my oven preheated to 400 degrees, and I have this radio looking cookie sheet. It's actually preheating on the bottom rack of the oven, and I will be baking my pies on that bottom rack at the very start. So the reason why I put the pies on the very bottom rack of the oven is because it's closest to the element, and I want the bottom crust to bake. Sometimes when you make a custard pie or a pumpkin pie, the bottom crust is soggy or it doesn't bake right in the middle. So some people blind bake it first and then brush it with egg white, so there's a barrier for the custard and the pie so it doesn't go soggy. But I like to put it right down below, cook the pie crust on that preheated cookie sheet, and then bring it up to the middle rack in the oven and bake it there for the duration of the baking time. Now this is my mom's recipe right here, and it's enough to make one pie, but I doubled it today because I was making 2 pies. And her recipe calls for evaporated milk, which I usually use, but I didn't have any today, so I replaced the evaporated milk with half and half, and the half and half cream. But you know, it'd be really good if you replace some of the evaporated milk with some eggnog. I think that would be good. So I just had some, and it's really good. So also, if you don't have fresh pumpkin, you can use canned pumpkin, but make sure it's the pure pumpkin, not the pumpkin pie filling. And for 1 pie, it's a half a can, so 1 3/4 cup of the puree. So my audio stopped working here, so I have to dub over. I've got 4 eggs. I'm just going to make sure you whisk that nicely. And then I have 1.5 cups of half and half cream and 1 cup of milk. And then whisk that together. And next I've got 1.5 cups of brown sugar. Make sure you get all the lumps out of that sugar too. And then 3.5 cups of pumpkin puree. It's 1 teaspoon of salt and 2 teaspoons of cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of ginger, 1 teaspoon of nutmeg, and a half a teaspoon of cloves. And make sure those spices are all mixed in really well. You might want to use a spatula to get them in all mixed in there. And here comes that ratty old cookie sheet. I'm going to put a piece of parchment paper on that. And I've got the pie shells from the refrigerator. And then we're going to pour the pumpkin pie mixture evenly into both shells. So I've got the oven at 400 degrees and the pies are on the very, very bottom rack. I've set the timer for 15 minutes, and when that goes off, I'm going to drop the temperature in the oven to 325 and bring the cookie sheet with the pies on it up to the middle rack. And we're going to continue baking until the center is just slightly jiggly, so maybe about another 40 minutes. And we're going to check to make sure that the upper crust doesn't get too brown, and if it does, we'll put a little bit of tin foil around there. Okay, so this timer went off. I'm going to lower this temperature to 325. And I'm going to carefully move these pies up. Let's do 35 minutes to start off with. So that was 15 minutes on the bottom rack of the oven at 400 degrees, and then 40 minutes at 325 in the middle rack. I initially had 35 minutes on the timer, but I put them back in for 5 minutes, and they look nice. Whenever I use cream, I save the carton, and I use it to store things in the freezer, like tomatoes. See, it's wax on the inside, and yeah, it's perfect for storing. So I'm going to take this leftover pumpkin puree. Oops, maybe I can do that better. Use a spoon. And we'll fill this. I can just wipe that off after. Fill this carton up with the puree. So I've got the pumpkin in there, about 2 cups, and all I do is just use an elastic to fasten it. Or you can put it in a Ziploc bag. But when that's frozen, that'll stay down there. So I've just placed this in a little bag just in case it tips and I don't want it to leak. But anyway, I've got it in a little bag, the twist tie, and I've labeled it. And when they freeze, you can actually stack these in the freezer like that. So that's why I save all of these little milk cartons. This has cooled down somewhat. Usually I like to leave it in the fridge overnight so it can set up. But I just wanted to show you what it looks like on the inside. Okay, and I hope this comes out nicely. Oh, it did. There's the pie crust. It's really hard to tell because it's dark out right now, but you can see that the pie crust on the bottom is baked and it's not soggy, and there's a nice light custard filling. So that'll keep those pieces nice. And I'm going to put this in the fridge and we'll have this for dessert tonight. So there's the pie for our neighbor and the one that we've gotten into already. And we had it for dessert and it was really good with whipped cream. And it's a great recipe for Thanksgiving. I know the Americans are having their Thanksgiving coming up soon, so that's a really nice recipe. And also for Christmas. So thanks for joining me in the kitchen today, and if you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing, and I'll see you again next time.